and the Germans let us go through. When we arrived on the border, the other side of the border in Holland, the passport man looked to the passports and he said, "Mrs. Sharp, these two men, the United Press and the Associated Press representatives, are not on your list, and I'm throwing them off. I'm sending them back to Germany."
In a frigid Sunday evening in the winter of 1939, the Reverend Waitstill Sharp had just wearily arranged himself in front of his fireplace when the telephone rang. His exhausting Sabbath had begun with his usual sermon, delivered to the Unitarian Society of Wellesley Hills, west of Boston, Mass. Then he led a confirmation class before spending the balance of the winter day trudging through the snow on personal calls to mostly elderly, housebound parishioners. By nightfall, Sharp was spent and loath to stir from the warmth and comfort of his hearth. "Hello?" Waitstill finally answered what he would describe, until the end of his life, as the most momentous call he'd ever received. "Hello, Waitstill," boomed a voice that Reverend Sharp knew at once. It was Everett Baker, Vice President of the American Unitarian Association, AUA, and a member of his congregation. "Say," he wondered, "has your day been too much that you and Martha can't come over to talk with me?" The summons was puzzling. Baker was the second most powerful figure in the National Unitarian Church. Waitstill Sharp was a rising star within the hierarchy, but at 37 he was comparatively new to the ministry. Why on a Sunday evening, he wondered? Would the Bakers require Martha and me at their house on a moment's notice? Martha Sharp, 33, Waitstill's wife of 10 years, was equally clueless and intrigued. She called a neighbor girl to come sit with their two children, 7-year-old Hastings and 2-year-old Martha Content, then headed out with her husband into the winter evening, both turning over in their minds what this urgent business might be. Ev Baker wouldn't disappoint them. He sat Martha and Waitstill down in his living room and announced that they were being invited by the highest authorities of the church to perform a unique and historic service. As soon as possible, Waitstill and Martha were to sail for Europe on an emergency relief mission to beleaguered Czechoslovakia, then menaced by Nazi Germany. The year was 1938, and the Munich Pact allowed the German annexation of the Sudetenland, an area of land bordering Czechoslovakia. This agreement shocked Christians in the United States who had close ties to churches in the region. Czechoslovakia had been a refuge for German and Austrian Jewish refugees fleeing the anti-Semitism of the German state. After seizing power, the Nazi state began economic boycotts of Jewish businesses. Anti-Semitic violence soon followed. German Jews were purged from the civil service. Many were unable to practice law or teach in schools and universities. By 1933, the Nazis had outlawed kosher traditions. Jewish students found it harder to gain access to education. Members of the American Unitarian Association, AUA, worked with a delegation of Quakers to understand the scale of the problem facing refugees in Czechoslovakia. In November 1938, Dr. Robert Dexter, who headed the AUA's Department of Social Relations, and a Quaker representative named Richard Woods sailed to Europe. Jewish students found it harder to gain access to education. Within weeks, they had made connections with other Unitarians and allies across mainland Europe. A report published on November 16th revealed that 200,000 refugees had fled the Sudetenland into Prague. Dexter and Woods estimated that 22,000 to 26,000 refugees were in need of immediate emigration relief. They recommended that Unitarians focus on supporting Jews and anti-Nazi Germans from the region. Unitarians and the Czech Relief Committee had raised more than $40,000 to assist. Reverend Waitstill Sharp, a minister from the Unitarian Church in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and his experienced social worker wife Martha, accepted the request to assist refugees in Europe. After graduating from Pembroke College, Martha's inclination towards service led her to seek a career in social work. She entered Northwestern University's Recreation Training School centered in Hull House, the Chicago settlement house founded by social worker Jane Addams in 1889. Upon completion of the course, she became director of girls' work for the Chicago Commons Settlement House, with care for some 500 young women of 26 different nationalities. She reveled in the diversity and the challenges of social work, thinking, with her marriage in 1927 to Waitstill Hastings Sharp, that she had taken only temporary leave of the profession. Although it was a career to which she never returned, Martha used many of its skills in other spheres of activity, including her work some 12 years later for the Unitarian Service Committee. Her husband had fulfilled his family's expectations by graduating from Harvard Law School, although he had, as a boy, dreamed of a career in the Foreign Service. During his third year of law school, however, he came to know Dr. Eugene Shippen, minister of Second Church in Boston. Spain was on the threshold of civil war. With an eye on these and other events, the Sharps started an international relations club. At the November 1938 meeting of the club, following the ceding of the Sudetenland to Hitler through the Munich Agreement, the Sharps led a discussion on the rape of Czechoslovakia. They had no way of knowing that within 3 months they would be on their way to Czechoslovakia as emissaries of Unitarian intervention in the tragic history of that beleaguered country. The way toward that intervention was paved by the AUA leadership immediately after the capitulation at Munich. There was at the time a Unitarian movement of some 3,500 souls in Czechoslovakia, with a main church, Unitaria, in Prague that had been nurtured by Unitarians in the US and Britain. The AUA was concerned to hear about the Nazi occupation. The church, with its strong connections to Czechoslovakia's small but active Unitarian population, asked the Sharps to travel to Czechoslovakia to assist the refugees and coordinate relief work. Waitstill discovered that the association had approached 17 other ministers who had each refused the request, but the Sharps didn't hesitate to accept the challenge, despite not knowing what might await them in Prague. In February 1939, leaving their 2 children in the care of close friends from their congregation, they departed for Europe. In Czechoslovakia, they were welcomed by the American embassy, grateful to find Americans willing to assist with the desperate needs of the refugees. Initially, the Sharps' work in Prague involved setting up a voluntary network to obtain travel documents, education, and employment for the refugees. Later, working closely with the British Quakers, Waitstill and Martha assisted hundreds more refugees by providing them with financial and humanitarian aid. Though they had to remind the refugees that the offices were not American territory and the Unitarians were not an immigration agency, the couple decided to assist individual immigration cases whenever they could, despite the risks involved. Martha also accompanied a group of refugees fleeing Nazi territory on a long train ride towards freedom in Great Britain, managing to prevent their arrests by invoking her protected status as an American citizen. Although Martha had serious doubts, she shared Waitstill's sense of responsibility, as she later said, "My husband and I felt that something should be done. Refugees in the Sudetenland had been killed. People were being imprisoned and hurt." Her greatest concern, however, was for their 7-year-old son and 2-year-old daughter. She said, "I had never thought of leaving them. It was being torn between my love and duty to my children and to my husband." As the Nazis approached Prague, the Sharps could have returned to the US, but instead decided to stay and continue their work. They secretly burned all their documents and notes in an office in Prague during the night of March 14, 1939. Afterwards, they kept no records of the refugees they smuggled out of Nazi-occupied Europe. What had first appeared to be a simple church mission suddenly became a dangerous venture with many lives at stake. The following day, when the Nazis marched into Prague, Martha guided an important resistance leader to asylum at the British Embassy. Stopped by Nazi guards 3 times, Martha's American passport enabled them to safely get through each checkpoint. A few days later, Waitstill arranged for a member of the Czech parliament to be smuggled from a hospital morgue in a body bag. The Gestapo did not permit people like the Sharps to continue their life-saving rescue of refugees. In July, their office was closed down and the furniture tossed into the street. Yet the courageous couple remained in Prague until August, when Waitstill attended a conference in Switzerland and was not permitted to return to Czechoslovakia. Threatened by imminent arrest by the Gestapo, Martha fled Prague alone. The Sharps then reunited in Paris and sailed for home. They immediately made contacts with personnel at the U.S. consulate, with Czech government officials, and with heads of the Red Cross and the Salvation Army, and with leaders of the Czech churches. Because the money from the Butler Committee was specifically earmarked for large-scale Sudeten refugee resettlement projects, they worked with government representatives to discern how best the money could be used. From rooms in the former Ministry of Health, given to them by the Czech government, and with the help of some bilingual Czech students, the Sharps processed dossiers of people needing to escape. On February 27th, Martha had a sufficient number of dossiers to warrant a 4-day sojourn in London for a meeting with members of the contact groups. However, in May 1940, the president of the American Unitarian Association asked the Sharps to again return to Europe as representatives of the newly formed Unitarian Service Committee, USC. Although the danger had increased with many European countries now under Nazi occupation, the Sharps accepted the new mission. The Sharps planned to open the USC's offices in France, but before they arrived in Europe, Nazi Germany occupied Paris. Instead, the couple opened an office in Lisbon, since thousands of refugees were rushing to neutral Portugal, hoping to find safety in a ship to the United States. While Waitstill Sharp was based in Lisbon, Martha worked at a new USC office in Marseille, the primary port in unoccupied France from which refugees could escape. During this time, the USC worked closely with Varian Fry, an American sent to Europe by the new Emergency Rescue Committee in New York. As refugees escaped with the help of the Emergency Rescue Committee, the USC helped them navigate the French-Spanish border and assisted with travel arrangements and money once the refugees reached Lisbon. Among those the Sharps assisted were Jewish Nobel laureate physicist Otto Meyerhoff and writers Franz Werfel and Leon Feuchtwanger. Leon escaped Nazi Germany in 1933 and remained a stern critic of the regime while living in France. War made his status in France precarious and dangerous. Under the French-German Armistice Agreement, signed after the defeat of France in June 1940, required the French government to hand over any German to Nazis upon request. Feuchtwanger's wife Martha had enlisted the support of Miles Standish of the U.S. consulate in Marseille to assist. Learning of his plight from a contact in the ERC, the Sharps took it upon themselves to assist the Feuchtwangers. Lion Feuchtwanger received a new identity card with his last name translated as Wetcheek. The detailed rescue plan involved Lion Feuchtwanger fleeing in women's clothing. Entry back into Spain was made possible thanks to his new identity card. The group took a train from Madrid to Portugal. Waitstill Sharp sat with Lion Feuchtwanger in first class, as his wife Marta sat in third class. This was a tactic to avoid suspicion from Spanish police. After all, Spain was under the dictatorship of the fascist Franco regime, who were sympathetic to the Nazis. Their arrival in Lisbon was short-lived, as they soon departed for New York. This was only possible after Martha Sharp gave up her ticket. Martha continued to find ways to break through the anti-Semitic United States immigration bureaucracy to allow Jewish children to come to the United States. She determinedly battled numerous bureaucracies to secure exit visas, transit permits, and identity papers for 27 children and 10 adults. She sailed from Lisbon with 2 of the children and 4 adults in early December 1940. The others followed on a second voyage. In 1940, Marianne Scheckler was 12 years old, one of triplet sisters who had fled Vienna with their parents just ahead of the Nazis. Now a resident of Laguna Hills, California, Marianne Scheckler Feeder still remembers that day, and Martha Sharp. She was a very elegant lady, kind of serious and very concerned. You looked up to her. What she did for us was outstanding. It will never be forgotten. Martha's organization of the children's transport became a model for the United States Committee for the Care of European Children, which brought several hundred children from France, Spain, and Portugal to the United States during World War II. These activities continued as planned until March 15th, when the German army marched into Prague. Shielded by Waitstill's cover as a visiting minister, the pair stayed on until August. Because they had come to Czechoslovakia before March 15th, their exit visas allowed them to re-enter the country after taking short trips abroad, so that between March 15th and early August, they made 6 separate trips to their various European contacts. On one of those trips, Martha led 35 refugees, including 2 children whose parents had committed suicide, to safety in England. Waitstill estimated that they had about 3,500 clients, mostly journalists, writers, and artists, other professional men and women, political leaders, and students. Many of these were Jewish and therefore doubly in danger. The Sharps were unable to keep records, so who those people were and what percentage of them actually did escape and, beyond that, survive the war, is unknown. The other part of the Sharps' mission, Refugee Relief, was easier to document. For Unitaria, the Unitarian congregation in Prague, they bought supplies of food, medicine, and wool, which were secreted under the great heavy tiles of the church floor. With the long term optimistically in mind, they gave money to Unitaria to pay down the mortgage. They helped the Czech National Church with a publication project and assisted the Salvation Army in its feeding program. Over a period of 4 months, they provided dinners and suppers for 350 German and Austrian refugees. Waitstill reported that by summer's end, 284 of them had escaped. The care of children was a primary concern. They gave money to children's homes and summer camps, to a refugee maternity pavilion sponsored by the Czech Red Cross, and to a children's relief project in Brno. Finally, there were subventions for students who were planning to leave by way of a secret route through Poland and then to England. While having lunch in a Prague cafe after the war, Waitstill was approached by a young Jewish woman to whom he had given 10,000 crowns for that journey. She had spent the war in the service of the British Army as a cartographer, the only one of a family of 88 to survive. The Unitarian mission did not escape Nazi suspicion. On April 13th, their offices were rifled, and on the 17th, while Waitstill was outside the country, Martha came to work to find that the furniture had been tossed out into the street. She moved the operation to a student bungalow until it was closed down entirely on July 25th. They stayed on, gathering loose ends until August. Waitstill left first on August 9th, planning to return after attending a meeting of liberal religious youth in Arkenio, Switzerland. He was not allowed back into Czechoslovakia. Martha left on August 15th, 3 weeks after the Nazis closed down all foreign refugee offices, and, as she learned after the war, a day before she was to be taken to Gestapo headquarters for questioning. They left from Cherbourg for New York on August 30th. Before the boat landed, Germany had invaded Poland, and World War II was underway. Through contacts they had made the previous year, the Sharps learned that there was a critical need for food in southern France, now crowded with hundreds of thousands of refugees. Children, especially, were at grave risk. For $400, the Sharps bought a 12-ton carload of condensed and powdered milk and Nestigen, a farina and milk product. They planned to send it to the village of Pau, in the Basses Pyrenees, where Donald and Helen Lowry, Paris contacts during their mission to Czechoslovakia, were acting as relief agents for the YMCA, the American Red Cross, and a Czech refugee group. The French Red Cross in Portugal provided a second carload of clothing and additional food, which the Sharps arranged to send to Perpignan and Montpellier, where it would be met by Red Cross representatives. Preceding the milk train, the Sharps reached Marseille in mid-July, where Richard Allen, representative of the American Red Cross, facilitated the customs requirements by designating the milk an official Red Cross shipment. At that point, Waitstill and Martha divided responsibilities. Waitstill would return to Lisbon to set up the Unitarian Rescue and Relief Center, and Martha would stay in France to wait for the milk shipment and set about finding children who could emigrate. Although Waitstill tried to arrange for more food to be sent from Lisbon to France, his efforts were unsuccessful. The British blockade, imposed immediately after the declaration of war against Germany, curtailed Red Cross and other relief shipments. Also, AUA leaders, especially Robert Dexter, were completely supportive of the blockade and gave no support to Waitstill's efforts to bring relief supplies into France. He had more success and more official AUA support for his work in setting up an emigration service in Lisbon and linking it to the efforts of Varian Fry of the Emergency Rescue Committee, ERC. Formed in June 1940, the ERC's mission was to rescue intellectual and political leaders trapped in southern France. Among those on the ERC's list were noted physiologist Otto Meyerhoff, the writers Lion Feuchtwanger, Franz Werfel, Heinrich Mann, and his nephew, Gottfried Mann, son of the writer Thomas Mann. Fry came to Waitstill and members of other rescue and relief organizations operating in Lisbon at the time for information on how to carry out his mission. Waitstill gave him the lay of the bureaucratic land and other tips. In addition, he agreed that USC would be the Emergency Rescue Committee's liaison in Lisbon, helping to maintain those who were able to get out of France and facilitating their passage to other places. This connection, which persisted throughout World War II, is one of the little-known facts about USC's early years. Waitstill made one more trip into France, coming back into Portugal with the writer Lion Feuchtwanger in September. By that time, the Reverend Charles Joy had arrived to continue the work of the Lisbon office. Using Martha's ticket, Feuchtwanger sailed for New York with Waitstill on September 28th. While Waitstill was in Lisbon, Martha and Helen Lowry worked with midwives in towns around Pau to identify children under the age of 2 who would be most in need of the milk. On August 20th, at a ceremony presided over by the mayor of Pau, they distributed a month's worth of milk for about 800 children. By that time, Martha had begun to gather children for the emigration project. The task would have defeated many of less energy and determination. The children needed medical certificates, vaccinations, photos, and affidavits from relatives and financial guarantors. The governments of 4 countries required documents allowing entry into, exit from, and passage through their borders. For 12 weeks, Martha dueled with bureaucrats, many of whom were uncooperative, some of whom were cruel, for the precious pieces of paper that, given the flow of history, would be lifesavers for those few lucky ones, especially for the 9 Jewish children in the group. Finally, on November 26th, a convoy of 29 children and 9 adults left the railroad station in Marseille for Spain, Lisbon, and then the United States. Martha sailed to New York in early December with 2 of the children and 4 of the adults. She was at the dock to welcome the rest when they arrived on December 23rd. After returning home, Martha joined USC's board of directors and lent the organization her considerable skills as a fundraiser. She continued her role as the minister's right hand until 1944, when Waitstill left the Wellesley Hills Church for a position in Cairo with the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Agency, UNRWA. Martha returned to Portugal in February 1945 to run the Lisbon office following the abrupt resignation of its directors, Elizabeth and Robert Dexter. When she learned that Portuguese authorities had asked the new U.S. ambassador to close USC's office as a friendly gesture to Portugal, she sought ways to clarify the organization's relationship with the Portuguese government, especially with the police who were arresting some of USC's clients. She choreographed a delicate diplomatic ballet that brought cooperation from the head of the international police, allowing her time to find avenues of emigration in Venezuela and Mexico for Spanish Republican refugees, who, by that time, were among the most numerous of USC clients. At the end of her commitment in Lisbon, Martha visited Czechoslovakia to observe conditions in that country and how USC might help the reconstruction effort. She continued to raise funds for USC and for Hadassah, the women's Zionist organization with which she was forming close ties. By December, however, the last in a series of what would now be called blatantly sexist slights by the USC leadership caused Martha to resign from the organization. She had endured them since her return from France in 1940, when her efforts to give substantial reports on her visits with Unitarians around the country were ignored by the leadership. In January 1947, Martha accepted Hadassah's invitation to travel to Palestine for a tour of youth Aliyah settlements as a prelude to a 3-month speaking campaign in the U.S. This was to be the first of 4 trips to the country, each one affirming her commitment to the new state, which she envisioned as a binational one with Arabs and Jews sharing a peaceful and increasingly fertile land. Twice, she stopped off in trouble spots on the way home to do undercover work for Jewish agencies. In 1948, she visited Morocco, where most Jews were living in squalor, and all were at the mercy of a capricious legal system. In 1950, Martha took a job in the Truman White House with the National Security Resources Board, a Cold War creation designed to mobilize the nation's resources, human and material, in the event of an attack by the Soviet Union. She continued to fundraise for Hadassah. She resigned with the inauguration of the Eisenhower administration and returned to New York, where she started a public relations business while maintaining her ties to Hadassah and Youth Aliyah. I even thought they got bullied and bluffed and bamboozled. They climbed mountains and traversed other treacherous terrain. They fed the hungry and clothed the nearly naked. They smuggled refugees out of countries in which they were in mortal danger, into other lands, some of whose borders were supposed to be closed, and most that were unenthusiastic about accepting the fugitives. They regularly risked their lives, and that is pure bravery. In the end, they couldn't save everyone, but they did everything possible to rescue many people from Nazi concentration camps. she has something special to say. Every life we touched had its own drama. One can only manage a miracle every so often, but a series of miracles can happen when many people become concerned and are willing to act at the right time. And that is why we need to remember that for every great crime, there are heroes who stood against it. There is evil, but there is good, and we can be the good. Let us keep the deeds of the righteous always before our eyes, and let us look for our opportunities in small matters and large to emulate them.